Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Steve and the foundation for having us and doing these sessions, and we're happy that you're joining us. So we're going to talk about all things rhythm section, and we're going to give you the bite size, and we're going to move quick. We're going to talk a lot. We're going to talk fast. And if you have questions throughout, you can put them in the chat. And if you have questions afterwards, you can reach out to us and we'll give you our email address as well. First of all, we want to say that this is not just a class for only rhythm section players. If you are a non-rhythm section musician, meaning you play the saxophone, or you are a singer, or you play the bassoon, or whatever other instrument than a rhythm section, this is perfect for you as well. So,
yes.
And we're going to kind of go back and forth through the three of us.
Yes, it's not just for musicians. Drummers are welcome as well.
Wow.
Alrighty, we're going to mute John, and Alejandro and I will have this conversation. No. And if you don't know, if you haven't seen La Lucha live or any of our workshops, we like to have a good time and we like to have fun. So, Al, do you want to give a kind of a brief overview of what we're going to try to, what we're going to hit today?
Yeah, so basically we have a lot of stuff that we can cover, not enough time to cover as much as we'd like to, just because there's, each thing can get so in depth. But basically we wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the rhythm section, how it kind of became what it is, and we kind of had an idea of a lot of these subjects kind of overlap. We didn't want to make this just a historical perspective on things, but, obviously with jazz or any style, really, it's very important to be able to know where things come from. Like you may recognize some of the names of some of the newer musicians in the scene, but all of those people came from studying the past masters, if you will, of the instrument, and the pioneers and people that became, that made this music what it is. So it's very important to be able to go back and study those people. So for us, let's see, we wanted to kind of send a PDF, and I think we didn't really post it in the end, but we wanted to reference a couple of rhythm sections that were very important in the development of music, one of them being the Count Basie rhythm section. Because it's kind of the origin of the swing beat, if you will. I mean, things swung before that, and there was a lot of stuff before that, but that was kind of the rhythm section that kind of started putting it all together in the way that we know it today. So walking bass lines, Walter Page, and we didn't, it's three of us. There's a guitar, very important part of that rhythm section. That was a guitar, Freddie Green, of course, Papa Joe Jones on drums.
I don't think they can see me.
Oh, just a reminder, if you can mute your microphone, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
So, yeah, so there's a lot of people to cover and all of specific stuff. We could do just one on that rhythm section specifically, but we thought maybe we could start asking each other some questions about how to put it all together. So, for example, John, what do you see the piano? What's the role of the piano in the rhythm section?
Well, the piano, I think, was one of the first instruments that was used to accompany other musicians, right? So singers and instrumentalists, and there wasn't always an orchestra or a string quartet available to accompany. And so the piano quickly became an instrument that was used to accompany. And so then when jazz came along, the piano was still used to accompany. The piano has, obviously, it can play chords, it can play notes, but it can also play in time. You can have those notes in rhythm.
Yes.
So then,
John,
go ahead.
You mentioned something. I just want to jump in. You said it can play time. So maybe before anything, let's answer the biggest question of all: who is responsible for time in the rhythm section?
Me.
Alejandro,
No.
are you responsible for time in the rhythm section?
Yes, I am.
And
Mark,
I am
are you responsible for time?
Absolutely. Everybody is responsible for time in the rhythm section. Do not lean on anybody else except everybody and yourself. Everybody is responsible for time. You need to play with good time and good feel, and good feel most of all. Do not lean on to the drummer for that. Do not yell at the pianist for that. Do not yell at the trumpet section or the saxophone section. Everybody's responsible for time. And we'll dive into a little bit later, but we're going to briefly talk about time and what that really means.
And another thing that I wanted to add to that, which may seem contradictory to what Mark said, but there's no absolutes in music. You know, there's every player is different, every musician is different, everybody's background is different in terms of how they approach the music and all that stuff. That's the beauty of music. That once you get on a bandstand, you can have three people from three different parts of the world, and somehow they're able to play music together and still hate each other, like John, Mark, and I.
Yeah.
Wait, what? No,
No,
we love each other, but no, really, that
together and at home, yeah.
No, but that really is a very, you know, it is a language, you know, not to use the cliche, but music is a language, and it's very important to recognize that is a way that you can speak across to each other in a common language of music. So,
Can I interrupt there?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, we have a little historical overview of different musicians. For example, the role of the piano during the swing era, it was Count Basie, who had a really important pianistic style. And then later on, it was more like Oscar Peterson and Wynton Kelly, and they had a certain style of comping, and which means accompanying within the rhythm section and with horn players. And then was like, we had Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock, and little by little, the music had was changing with the styles of the different musicians. And so, you know, Count Basie would play very little, or he would play in spots where the band wasn't playing, and he would play like in the high register, these weird like drop two voicings, you know. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da. And so then that was nothing what like Bill Evans would accompany, or the way that he would include. So going back, go ahead.
Yeah, and one thing that I was going to say, that I think a parallel evolution of that comes from the bass and the drums. You know, I'll talk specifically from the bass perspective, because obviously rhythm sections played together, and they gave each other the space, or they gave each other inspiration. So for example, in that Count Basie thing, you know, you had before Count Basie, you know, you had the bass lines were playing mostly kind of roots and fifths, right?
The tuba.
Yeah, more of that type of stuff. Then, you know, Walter Page came along and started playing walking bass lines, you know, and they were in, you know, he was starting to move a little bit more, repeating some notes, stuff like that. And then little by little, people started freeing it up, specifically the arrival of Jimmy Blanton, who played with Duke Ellington early on. He was only on the scene for a few years, but he really revolutionized the way the bass was played, because he was the first bass player to really have the facility to play like a horn player. So all of a sudden, his bass lines were more sophisticated. His harmonic approach was more sophisticated, which freed the rest of the band to do different things. Now the piano player didn't have to rely so much on the left hand. That came later to people like Ray Brown, who took the Jimmy Blanton approach a step further. And then you mentioned Bill Evans, who had a virtuoso like Scott LaFaro on bass, who really kind of abandoned the role of the traditional bass and started being much more interactive. And I think that affected the drums as well. So all this evolution was hand in hand between the instruments. So Mark can talk a little bit about how that affected the drummers.
So the overview of the drums was and still is a marching instrument. There were multiple humans playing this. You needed somebody to play each one of these things. And I don't have a bass drum with me, but there was a bass drum player. And at one point, somebody, probably in New Orleans, put the drum set together and arranged it in a contraption, which became a trap set, and they played it by themselves. And it probably didn't sound great because musicians, percussionists were not as coordinated to play a kit like that. And so it progressed over time. Musicians like Warren Baby Dodds, they learned how to play rhythms that were popular at the time, mainly on just one instrument, maybe just the snare drum. And over time, the instrument developed to being able to raise the hi-hat. The hi-hat was actually on the ground. That's why it's called sock cymbal. Or it was called a low boy, and then a drummer named Papa Joe Jones raised it up and higher, and they call it the hi-hat. And his nickname was Mr. Hi-Hat, and time was kept on 2 and 4 on the hi-hat. You could also play on it. And at that time, the ride cymbal at early 1900s was not even being played as a timekeeper or a rhythm time. It was just being crashed as an accessory. And drummers like Gene Krupa and Papa Joe Jones, they were influential in creating kind of the modern drum set. And companies like Gretsch and Ludwig, they were started to make more instruments or more drums tunable, and raising up cymbals, creating different types of hi-hats and stands to make that happen. And the role of the drummer changed quite a bit during that bebop era. There was some progression before that, but in the bebop era, musicians like Max Roach, for instance, he was sort of like in the middle there during the bebop time, creating this very melodic sound. So at that time, drummers were just the timekeepers playing rhythm only, and they started to play a little more rather than just something like... They then started to become more rhythmic on other parts of the drum set. So they became involved in the melodic side. When you get to the time of Bill Evans a lot later, musicians just like Marty Morell, who is in the Tampa Bay area and played drums with Bill Evans for a really long time, he almost became a harmonic point of the band, playing with different cymbal sounds and playing extremely melodic to interweave melodically with the other instruments. So the role of the drums has progressed, exponentially just in the last 105 years. That's how old the instrument really is. 120 years now.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about when you think about it, any sort of music that you listen to since the 50s, and really this started with jazz, the rhythm section became the engine of everything. A lot of stuff is bass and drums and keyboard and guitar oriented. That's the foundation of a lot of the music in the last 70 plus years. And that's a really interesting connection to jazz, because that's how these instruments developed their role, their current role, of being the foundation. And so now that kind of going back to the function of each instrument in the band. Of course, the piano is playing harmony and rhythm. We're all, except for the drums. You could say the drums are playing pitch, of course, just not in a melodically recognized way like the piano or the bass. But, you do have different timbres that you can play around with. And, the bass is kind of in the middle, locking both of those instruments. So
yeah,
and very much
we
playing
actually
rhythm.
Set up that way as well. If you see La Lucha perform, if you're in the audience, you see the piano on the left, the drums are on the right, and the bassist is right in the middle. Alejandro's in the middle. And this is a really common way, rhythm section trios set up. Even if it's instead of piano, if it's a guitarist, they'll set up in that way. And I think for me, it works because the bassist just kind of like is in between that rhythmic and harmonic world.
Yeah,
and we can also talk about how each instrument sort of locks up in such a way that the ride cymbal will lock up mainly with the bass player who's playing.
We talk about
pulse.
that. Who leads the rhythm section and why, and how and why do we play together?
All right. So that's a great question. Who leads the rhythm section, guys?
Obviously, I do.
Obviously, I do. I count off the song.
What?
No. I'm just kidding.
No, well, no. It's actually funny because it kind of changes. As a bass player, a lot of the times, in jazz, very often you find yourself playing with people you don't play with often because basically a lot of people will be like, they'll call back when there used to be gigs. They call and say like, hey, I need a bass player to play standards, 2 hours, blah, 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 this place. Cool. You show up, you meet the guy, the piano player and the drummer, maybe a horn player, and then you're off to the races, Okay, Satin Doll. Hopefully everybody knows it in the same key. But, that's kind of the way it works. So a lot of it has to do with listening and listening across. A lot of the times as a bass player, I look to the piano player to kind of help me not help me, but, dictate what they want.
Don't lie.
No, a lot of the times, and help me sometimes, if somebody calls a tune I don't know, then, a lot of the times the piano player will help with the chord changes and all that. So it really is, a lot of it gravitates towards the pianist, but I think a lot of it, sometimes I look at the drummer, if the drummer knows the arrangement, they're really good at dictating, hey, here are the hits, we're going to play a hit on beat 4 here. So it kind of changes throughout, which brings me to this very important part, which is, I forgot what it was. It was so important I forgot. No, the very important part of how how does the rhythm section view the music as opposed as from us, how does a singer's perspective differ, or a horn player's perspective of the music differ from a rhythm section? Because the rhythm section usually kind of hangs out together. Well, what do you think, John? How do you think that affects the communication?
And totally affected. The most important part is for all of us to have the big picture of the song together. So if we call a song Satin Doll, hopefully you've heard it, you've listened. The most important thing you can do as a rhythm section is have listened to the song you're playing, especially if it's a standard. And so, we're calling Satin Doll, and I go, and then hopefully they know where to come in because they've heard that's the Duke Ellington intro, for example.
Well, let me jump in and say something, a real life example that happens to us, because we learned on the Bandstand. Yes, we went through jazz education in school and we learned how to do these things, but the best way to learn is on the Bandstand with other musicians. And we've been fortunate to get to play with a ton of musicians and in different styles, whether it's bebop or modern jazz. And in one situation, we were playing older swing music, and someone called a song, was it Sweet Lorraine maybe? I don't know. It maybe was that, or I Found a New Baby. And these are tunes that are standards in a different circle of musicians, in kind of an early jazz circles. And they're fantastic tunes, but the three of us didn't know it. So we have 3 options. We could say, hey, we're not familiar with this tune. Maybe we could suggest another one. Number 2, you can say, oh, you know what? Let me pull up the changes really quick. Yeah. Or you could say, no, I quit. I'm never going to do this again. But regardless, if you don't know it or you pull up the changes, write it down and learn it. Go on your way home, find the recording, listen to it, listen to a bunch of recordings, and then learn the tune. and play them. And we would do this consistently, where we would make a list of songs we didn't know, or we just weren't, one of us wasn't familiar with it, and we would figure out how to play it. And kind of that sort of leads to another question I have to Alejandro and John, which is it okay to use the real book or iReal Pro changes?
It's the $1 million question. Well,
yes.
I think the important thing is not so much that you have changes in front of you, because sometimes they're helpful, of course, but the important thing is that to recognize that those chord changes are not always right, and to listen across the band to make sure that you're agreeing on what chord change. So if I'm playing something for the first time, somebody calls a tune, pull out my phone, pull out the changes, because I at least want to be able for the guys to have fun playing it, hopefully. And, I noticed that the piano player in a certain section is playing a different chord. So I'll try to identify that that's the chord. I'm not going to bury my face in the music and ignore that I'm playing with people. And that's actually the point I was going to bring out earlier about listening to each other. And the whole real book thing, it's all, there's people that look at you dirty if you show up at a gig with the real book, and it's fine. I completely understand. I mean, there's people that have spent a lot of time studying this music, and to them, that's disrespectful to a certain extent. And it's fine, different people react to things in different ways. Generations are different, And
that kind of leads me back to sort of the original question you had for John. And the purpose that three of us serve is to, make the song. We're going to play the song. It's all about playing the song and making the music feel and sound as good as possible. If we're performing with a singer or a saxophonist or a trumpet player, whatever it is, we're supposed to lift them up and make them feel like they are the best musicians in the world. They probably called us for the gig, and so they like what we do, and but that does not give us free range to go and do whatever we want. If I was listening to a Coltrane album on the way to the gig, it doesn't mean that I'm allowed to play, super out Coltrane if that's not what the gig is.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm, as a pianist, they're going to be playing all the time. Mark's going to be doing the stang-a-lang, dang, dang, da, dang, keeping time. Alejandro will be walking either in 4 or in 2. And then I'm the one that has the middle register, the register that people can hear right here. And so the first thing we got to do is make the other musicians feel comfortable. So if we're playing a song and I am just comping everywhere and just not leaving any room for the other person, then I'm not going to make anybody feel comfortable, including the other 2 rhythm section players. And so the first thing, is to listen to each other and to have a...
What was that? I'm sorry?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think a lot of this has to do, it brings us back to which is good. I wanted to address the time situation again, because there is a fine line where you can have somebody pull back. There's musicians that famously like to pull back into the phrasing and all of that stuff, but there is a way that you navigate those things. There is a fine line between pulling back and dragging.
Maybe let's the three of us at the same time name one tenor saxophonist that plays behind. See if it's the same person.
I thought we were naming names.
1, 2, 3.
Dexter Gordon.
I'm not naming names. No, but
in a good way. In a
good way. Exactly. It's part of the phrasing. So and it's part of that sound. So I think the important thing for us to react is that we heard a masterclass recently of a great guitar player who was saying that he practiced with a metronome so much to kind of perfect his time that he failed to realize that the time is whatever is happening on the stand with the other musicians, because everybody's got, I dare anybody finding somebody that has metronomic time, perfect time.
Yeah.
That really, there's some fantastic musicians that are incredibly solid, but the reality is that the way you play together is what makes the music feel good. So like if you have a soloist you know, I think it's good to listen across and be able to help each other. So if there's somebody that's maybe got lost in the form, happens very much. Somebody's soloing, gets lost in the form. You know, like I always look at Mark and say, like, what's going to happen? So Mark immediately he tries to put tries to delineate the form, maybe with a crash at the beginning of a downbeat or something like that. I've seen musicians that actually do the opposite, and they try to. Maybe they're doubting where they are or something like that. Maybe they actually start playing more and making things more difficult to hear. You know, but I think for the sake of playing together, I think it's important to be able to help each other.
Right?
What's that?
We try to go with the soloist as well. Sometimes, even if the soloist made the mistake, if where they are is clear with the melody and how they're playing the changes, the rhythm section will almost always, if they're nice, they're going to look at each other and try to agree on where the horn player is. And if they're playing the melody, then it'll be easy. So as a horn player, if you get lost, start playing the melody of where you think it is, and you hire nice guys and they will go with you, because we're all there to serve the music and not to throw each other under the bus and
something that happens, you know, that happens very, very commonly with singers, you know, because speaking about the wavelength, you know, a lot of singers, you know, learn by ear, don't necessarily know a lot of musical terms to communicate with the band, to say like, here's the bridge or something. They may call it something different because a lot of times they view things from a lyrical perspective. So if somebody comes in the middle of like an A section too early or something like that, we gotta go with that person, whether they're right or wrong. They're actually in front. Yeah, that's okay. We didn't
sign a contract that said I will stay in the form, or else, you know, jazz ruined forever.
Happen. And so, as a rhythm section, for example, as a pianist being an accompanist, if you know the lyrics to the song and you hear that the singer is singing the lyrics to the second A, then you're like, you look at the guys and go, you know, the next section is not going to be a second A, it's going to be a bridge, because they started, you know, they skipped an A or they're singing a different. So being able to communicate with each other what's going on, or maybe the drummer knows the lyrics and they realize, hey, bridge coming up. And then the point is that we all, you know, communicate and help each other.
Team effort.
We're all in one team playing together.
We kind of, if you have a saxophonist and they tend to be slowing down, start to investigate the situation. Why do you think that they're slowing down? And your neurons are going to be popping. Is it that they're a young musician? Is it that they're doing it on purpose?
Sorry, I wanted to jump in really quick because I think that's a good way to mention big band playing with a big band. Because that actually happens a lot of times. Horn players are trying to play lines together, complex lines and stuff like that. Everybody has a different challenge, and a lot of the times we found ourselves. I remember a lead trumpet player who described as the big band being the drummer is the bus driver, and the horn players are all maniacs sticking their hands out and blankets and everything, trying to slow the bus down. And, you know, that doesn't always happen. But, again, playing as a band together, that's, again, going back to the basic band from the horn perspective, that's what's remarkable, that those guys were able to play together, breathe as a unit with multiple people. So, Mark, how would you describe, you know, how would you approach that situation if you're playing behind a big band?
Normally, the drummer has said that they're behind the truck driving, and I'm going to try to keep the time together, because I know that written lines or feeling that's not written there is going to move in a certain way. So I'm really going to try to lock in with the rhythm section, and I know some things may not always line up with the horns, and that's okay. You know, it might be written in the chart or it might not be. So you just have to feel out those situations. If you listen to a lot of Count Basie, the drummer approaches it, you know, Sonny Greer will approach that 15 different ways on one different tune. So listen to a lot of the different recordings and hear how they do that. I'm really going to try to stay close to the time as possible.
And listening to the style.
Always.
Every time, if you're trying to play a style of music, You know, I can't tell how many times I've found students who want to play jazz or any other style really, and I tell them, well, do you listen to this music? Who do you listen to? And they're like, oh no. Well, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the advantage that we have as a generation, is that we have hundreds of thousands of recordings that we can listen to see what they did and stand on their shoulders and take it to the next level.
Yeah. Hey guys, we have less than a minute. Just to recap, some things is to be nice and communicate ideas clearly, or try to learn that through gigs, asking people how to communicate, learn musical terms like forms, and so that you can communicate. Also, if you want specific chord changes, provide a chart or talk to the musicians ahead of time. Another thing you can do is learn repertoire. As a serious jazz musician, you should have a basic understanding of basic repertoire that most people will call, even if it's a modern gig or a traditional gig. And
all right. We got less than a minute.
Good sound, good feel, good time. Good time is not the same as good feel, and good feel is not the same as good time. All of it is important.